Listen, I'm not saying the Sovereign Collective was stupid. That would be unfair and quite frankly diplomatically inadvisable. What I am saying is that for a species that had conquered 73% of the known galaxy, they had a shocking blind spot when it came to understanding humanity. But let me back up. My name is Daniel Raw, and I'm what the Earth Council generously calls a senior diplomatic envoy, which is corporate speak for the guy we send when everything is already gone to hell, and we need someone who won't cry when aliens threaten to vaporize him. It's a niche position, but someone's got to do it, and apparently, I have the face for it. By which I mean I have the kind of face that looks perpetually unimpressed, even when staring down the business end of a plasma cannon. The day everything changed started like any other day in my spectacularly unglamorous career, with me standing in front of a council of aliens who were absolutely convinced they held all the cards. The Sovereign Collective's flagship, the Eternal Dominion, was exactly what you'd expect from a species that named themselves Sovereign and thought it was a modest choice. The ship was roughly the size of Belgium and had enough firepower to crack a planet like an egg. The conference chamber where they'd summoned me was designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings that stretched up into artificial darkness, walls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and a temperature kept just uncomfortable enough to remind you that you were at their mercy. At the center of it all sat High Chancellor Vexthor of the Jakari Empire, the de facto leader of the collective. Picture a bipedal lizard the size of a grizzly bear, covered in scales that shifted through various shades of crimson and gold, depending on his mood. Currently, they were settling into what my xenobiology briefing had described as smug satisfaction with underlying hostility. Great human Vexthor said, his voice resonating through the chamber with the kind of gravitas that suggested he'd practiced this speech in the mirror. You stand before the Sovereign Collective as a representative of a conquered species. I blinked. Do I? His scales rippled, confusion mixing with irritation. We have destroyed your outer colonies. We have blockaded your shipping lanes. We have demonstrated overwhelming military superiority. Your resistance has been quaint. Quaint? I repeated, as if tasting the word. That's a new one. Usually people go with futile or inadvisable quaint. As a certain Genu's left, Commander Xylo of the Korean Dominion leaned forward. The Cretheans were insectoid, all chitinous armor and compound eyes, and they had a disturbing tendency to make clicking sounds when they were annoyed. Right now, Xylo sounded like a tap dancer having a seizure. Your flippancy is inappropriate, Xylo said. The collective offers you terms of surrender. You should be grateful we offer terms at all. Oh, I'm very grateful, I said, pulling out a chair that hadn't been offered to me and sitting down. Nothing says we respect you as worthy adversaries, like demanding unconditional surrender. Really warms the heart. I could see the confusion rippling through the assembled delegates. There were representatives from a dozen species in the room. The Jakari, the Kreans, the Vuline, jellyfish in mechanized suits, long story, the Danish, rock people, very literal, and various others who'd thrown their lot in with the collective. When it became clear that resistance was indeed futile, they'd conquered hundreds of worlds. They'd steamrolled through the galaxy like a cosmic bulldozer, and here I was, acting like I'd been invited to a particularly dull dinner party, rather than the formal surrender of my entire species. You will accept our terms, Vexthor continued, his scales darkening to a deep burgundy, or we will reduce your homeworld to atoms. We have done this before. We will not hesitate to do so again. Right, I said, waving my hand dismissively. The terms. Let's talk about those. From what I understand, you want complete control of Earth's resources. conscription of our population into your labor forces, total disarmament, and this is my personal favorite, the voluntary relocation of our political leadership to your penal colonies. Do I have that right? You do, Vexthor said. And you expect us to just agree to this. We expect you to acknowledge reality. Commander Xylo interjected. Your fleet is decimated. Your defenses are in ruins. You have no allies. You have no options. This is not a negotiation. I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the artificial darkness above us. See? That's where you've made your first mistake. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Vexthor's scales went completely still, the Jakari equivalent of a poker face. Explain, he said. You think this isn't a negotiation, I said. You think you've won. You think that because you've blown up some ships and occupied some colonies, we're going to roll over and accept whatever terms you dictate. I brought my gaze back down to meet his. But here's the thing about humans that you somehow missed in all your intelligence gathering. We're really bad at knowing when we're beaten. Empty bravado, Xylo clicked. Is it? I reached into my jacket pocket, which caused about 15 weapons to track my movement, and pulled out a small data pad. Before I left Earth, I did a little research, historical research. See, humanity has this annoying habit of fighting wars we have absolutely no business winning. I tapped the data pad, projecting images into the air above the conference table. Hack your supply chain logistics, and now shipments keep ending up at the wrong locations. Coincidentally, those locations are always near human resistance cells. I scrolled through more reports. Colony 4, your soldiers keep getting food poisoning. Not enough to kill them, just enough to make them wish they were dead. Turns out our bacteria don't play nice with your digestive systems, and someone keeps accidentally contaminating your mesh holes. Colony 9, the entire population has learned your language and now spends every waking moment filing formal complaints through your legal system. Apparently, your bureaucracy wasn't designed to handle 17 million grievances per day. A Danish representative, Admiral Kronks, if I remembered correctly, spoke up. His voice sounded like grinding granite. Insurgency is expected. It will be crushed. Will it? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, you're learning what every empire throughout history has learned the hard way. Occupying a population is easy. Governing it is hell, and governing humans. I laughed. Good luck with that. You are stalling, Vexthor said, his scales shifting to an angry orange. These are minor inconveniences. They do not change the fundamental balance of power, don't they? I stood up, pacing around the table. The assembled delegates tracked me like I was an unexploded bomb. Let's talk about the fundamental balance of power. You have more ships. You have better weapons. You have a larger territory. All of that is absolutely true. But here's what you don't have. Time. Time. XY clicked skeptically. Time? I confirmed. See, you're an empire. Empires need to project strength. They need their subject species to believe that resistance is futile, that the collective is inevitable, that surrender is the only logical option. What happens when the galaxy sees that humanity, little backwater humanity, with their primitive fusion drives and their barely functional shield technology, is giving you hell? I could see the realization starting to dawn on some of the faces around the table. You're worried about your reputation, I said, pointing at Vexthor. You should be. Because right now, we're making you look weak. Every day that we hold out, every colony that refuses to bend the knee, every supply ship that gets raided by our privateers, it all sends the same message to the galaxy. The sovereign collective can be resisted. We will destroy you, Vexthor said. But there was something uncertain in his voice now. We will make an example of Earth that will echo through the ages. You could do that, I agreed. You absolutely could. You could glass Earth, kill every human in the solar system, and send a very clear message about what happens to species that defy you. I paused. But then you'd have a different problem. And what problem would that be? Xylo demanded. You'd turn us into martyrs, I said simply. You'd prove that the only way to deal with human resistance is genocide. And you know what that would do? It would scare every other species in the galaxy absolutely shitless. Because if the collective is willing to commit genocide, rather than accept a negotiated settlement, then every species you've conquered, every species you're planning to conquer, would know that their only options are complete submission or extinction. That's not an empire. That's a death cult. The silence that followed was profound. More importantly, I continued, it would validate every single resistance movement in your territory, because we're not the only ones causing you problems, are we? The Ythrani have been running guerrilla operations in the Outer Rim for 2 years. The Pelt Confederacy never formally surrendered. They just retreated to their deep space habitats and have been raiding your convoys ever since. The Vortan enclaves are still holding out in the Barrier Nebula, and those are just the ones I know about. I walked back to my chair and sat down, crossing my legs casually. Right now, those groups look at humanity, and they see hope. They see proof that the collective isn't invincible. You glass Earth, and suddenly every resistance movement in the galaxy has their rallying cry. Remember Earth. Never surrender. Make them pay for every meter. Admiral Crone slammed his rocky fist on the table. You overestimate your importance, human. You are one species among thousands. Maybe, I said. But we're a loud species. We're the species that's making you waste time and resources on this meeting, instead of consolidating your conquests. We're the species that's proving your military superiority isn't enough. And most importantly, we're the species that just made you doubt whether you can win. We have won. Vex there roared, his scales blazing crimson. This meeting is a formality. You are defeated. Then why are you talking to me? I asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. If we're defeated, I continued, why not just push the button? Why not just send the order to your fleet and end this? Why waste your time negotiating with a conquered species? I leaned forward. I'll tell you why. Because you're not sure you can afford to. Explain, Vexthor said, through what sounded like gritted teeth. You're overextended, I said. Your empire is enormous, but it's also fragile. You rule through fear and overwhelming force. But that only works when everyone believes you're unstoppable. The moment that belief cracks, the whole thing falls apart. And right now, humanity is that crack. I pulled up another file on my datapad. Your economy is straining under the cost of occupying our colonies. Your military is spread thin, trying to contain resistance movements across a dozen sectors. Your subject species are watching to see what happens here, and they're wondering if humans can defy the collective. Why can't we? You have no intelligence on our internal affairs. Xylo protested, but he didn't sound convinced. Don't I? I smiled. Your supply lines are running at 87% efficiency, down from 94% before you invaded human space. Your casualty rates from insurgency operations have tripled in the last 6 months. You've had to redeploy forces from 3 other sectors to maintain your occupation of our colonies. And according to my sources, you're facing increased piracy, work slowdowns, and civil unrest in at least 7 of your core territories. I let that sink in. You're not here to accept our surrender. I said, you're here because you need us to surrender. You need us to validate your empire, to prove that resistance really is futile. Because if you can't break humanity, what does that say about your control over everyone else? The chamber was silent, except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. Finally, Vexthor spoke. "What are you proposing?" "Now we're getting somewhere," I said, allowing myself a small smile. "Here's what I'm proposing. We negotiate an actual peace treaty, not terms of surrender. A treaty between sovereign powers." "Unacceptable," Xylo clicked immediately. "Let him speak," Vexthor said, his scales shifting to a more neutral purple. "Thank you," I said. "Here are the basics. We acknowledge the collective as the dominant power in this region of space. We agree to non-aggression pacts, trade agreements, technology sharing on mutually beneficial terms. We even agree to provide military assistance in certain circumstances, defensive only, and we retain full autonomy. In exchange for what?" Vexthor asked. "In exchange, you withdraw from our colonies. You recognize Earth's sovereignty. You acknowledge humanity as an independent power, rather than a conquered species. And most importantly, you set a precedent that the collective can negotiate." I said that there's a path to peace that doesn't require total submission. That resistance can lead to accommodation rather than annihilation. I gestured around the room. "You want a stable empire. Stop trying to rule through terror alone. Give your subject species a reason to cooperate other than fear. Humans are offering you that opportunity. And if we refuse," Admiral Kronks rumbled, "then we keep fighting," I said with a shrug. "You'll eventually win probably, but it'll cost you years and resources you can't afford to waste. And even if you win, you'll lose because the precedent will be set anyway. The galaxy will know that the only way to deal with humans is genocide. And suddenly, every species will be looking at you as an existential threat, rather than just another empire." I stood up again, walking toward the massive view screen that dominated one wall of the chamber. Through it, I could see the stars, billions of them, spreading out across the infinite dark. "You know what the real rule number 1 is?" I asked, not turning around. "It's not might makes right, or the strong survive, or any of that social Darwinist garbage. The real rule number 1 is this: never underestimate a species that's too stupid to know when they're beaten. Because sometimes, just sometimes, being too stupid to quit is the same as being smart enough to win." I turned back to face them. "So, here's my offer. We can end this war today. We can shake hands, or claws, or tentacles, or whatever, and we can build something that doesn't require you to constantly watch your back for the next uprising. Or we can keep fighting, and you can find out exactly how long humans can make a defeated species stay standing." The silence stretched. Finally, Vexthor's scales shifted through a dozen colors before settling on a deep, contemplative blue. "You are either very brave or very foolish, humanoid." "I prefer to think of myself as pragmatically optimistic," I replied. "And you truly believe your species will accept these terms? That they will not see it as surrender?" "Oh, they'll see it exactly as surrender," I said honestly. "The difference is, they'll see it as your surrender to reality. We're giving you a face, saving way out of a war that's costing you more than you ever anticipated. Take it." Vexor turned to confer with his fellow delegates. The conversation was in their own languages, a mix of guttural growls, clicking sounds, and harmonic resonances that my translator could barely keep up with. I waited, trying to project more confidence than I felt. Truth was, I was sweating under my formal jacket. I just bet the future of humanity on a theory. The theory that the collective was more concerned about its image than its pride. If I was wrong, I'd probably just signed Earth's death warrant. If I was right, I just pulled off the biggest bluff in human history. After what felt like an eternity, Vexthor turned back to me. "We will consider your proposal, but understand this, human raw. We do not negotiate from weakness. If we agree to your terms, it is because we choose to be magnanimous, not because we are forced. Of course, I said, keeping my face carefully neutral. Your magnanimity is noted and appreciated. We will require certain assurances. Commander Xylo added, verification protocols, enforcement mechanisms, penalties for non-compliance. Absolutely. I agreed. I wouldn't trust us either. Let's hammer out the details. 3 months later, I stood in the same conference chamber aboard the Eternal Dominion. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The Treaty of Proxima, named for the neutral star system, where the final negotiations had taken place, was ready for signing. The document was a masterpiece of diplomatic doublespeak. The collective got to claim they'd achieved their strategic objectives, trade access, technology sharing, and a formal acknowledgement of their power. Humanity got what we actually wanted: our freedom, our colonies, and the right to chart our own course. Most importantly, the treaty established a framework for other species to negotiate their own settlements with the collective. The Aethrani had already reached out about beginning talks. The Pelfsea Confederacy was considering it. Even the stubborn Vorten were making interested noises. Vexthor approached me as the various delegates began affixing their signatures and biomarks to the treaty. His scales were a contented gold. You played us well, Humanor, he said quietly. I prefer to think we played each other to a mutually beneficial stalemate. I replied, perhaps. He studied me with his alien eyes. Tell me truthfully, could you have continued fighting? I considered the question. Could we? Yes. Would it have been pretty? No. We were maybe 3 months from complete collapse. Our fleet was running on fumes. Our colonies were on the brink of starvation, and our entire defense strategy washed together with hope and improvisation. I smiled, but you didn't need to know that. Vexthor's scales rippled with what I'd learned to recognize as amusement, and we were perhaps 6 months from recalling forces from the front to deal with internal rebellions. Your resistance inspired more defiance than you know. But you didn't need to know that. We stood there for a moment, 2 representatives of species who'd been trying to kill each other just a few months ago, sharing the understanding that sometimes the most important battles are won not with weapons, but with words. Your rule number 1, Vexthor said. Is it truly a human philosophy? Or did you invent it for the negotiation? Does it matter? I asked. I suppose not. He extended one massive clawed hand, a human gesture he'd learned specifically for this occasion. May our species never forget this lesson, human row. I shook his hand. May they never need to. The flight back to Earth was long, and gave me plenty of time to think. I'd spent the better part of a year staring down the barrel of an interstellar war, and I'd somehow managed to talk my way out of it. As victories went, it wasn't going to make for an exciting hollow film. No massive space battles, no last-minute heroics, just a lot of talking and bluffing and hoping the other side blinked first. But it was a victory nonetheless. When I finally made it back to Earth to the orbital station that served as the headquarters for the Earth Council, I was expecting a hero's welcome. Parades, medals, maybe a statue or 2. Instead, I got summoned directly to the council chambers, where the 5 members of Earth's governing body waited with expressions that ranged from relieved to annoyed. Councillor Winters, the head of the council, was the first to speak. She was a sharp woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the kind of stare that could strip paint. Raw, she said. Do you have any idea what you've done? Prevented the extinction of humanity. I offered you, negotiated away our strategic military options. Councillor Yang interjected. He was younger, aggressive, The kind of politician who thought every problem could be solved by throwing more missiles at it. You've tied our hands with this treaty. We're locked into cooperation agreements, trade deals, technology sharing, and we're alive. I interrupted. We're free. Our colonies are being returned to us. We have a seat at the galactic table. You're welcome. It's not that simple. Councillor Okafor said she was the pragmatist of the group, always thinking 3 moves ahead. You've set a precedent. Other species will expect similar treatment. The collective may use this as leverage in future negotiations. Good. I said, let them. The more species that negotiate instead of fight, the more stable the galaxy becomes. And the more stable the galaxy, the better it is for everyone, including us. Councillor Hernandez, the quiet one who rarely spoke but always listened, finally chimed in. What you're describing is a fundamental shift in how galactic power operates. You're suggesting we move from a might makes right system to something more diplomatic. I'm suggesting we move toward a system where wars of conquest become too expensive to be worth fighting. I said, look, I'm not naive. The collective isn't going to become a benevolent democracy overnight. But if we can make peace more profitable than war, even for empires, then we've accomplished something significant. Councillor Winter studied me for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, she smiled. You've either doomed us or saved us raw. I suppose we'll find out which in a few years. That's the spirit of optimism I was hoping for, I said dryly. For what it's worth, Winters continued. You did well. The Council formally recognizes your achievement in securing the Treaty of Proxima. You'll receive the Earth Star, our highest civilian honor. I'd rather have a vacation, I muttered. Denied, Winter said, but she was still smiling. You're now our chief negotiator with the Sovereign Collective. Congratulations on your promotion. I stared at her. You're joking. I never joke about assignments, Raw. But I hate diplomacy. Yes, but you're excellent at it, Councillor Okafor said. And right now, we need excellence more than we need enthusiasm. I slumped in my chair, realizing I'd just negotiated myself into a job I didn't want. This is what I get for being good at my job. Welcome to government service, Winters said cheerfully. Now get out. You have a debriefing with the intelligence services in an hour, and after that, we need you to review the preliminary trade agreements with the Cranian Dominion. I left the council chambers in a daze, wondering how I'd gone from preventing genocide to shuffling trade paperwork in the span of a single meeting. That night, I found myself in a bar in the Earth Orbital Station, nursing a drink and trying to process everything that had happened. The place was called The Last Stand, which I found grimly appropriate given recent history. The bartender was a grizzled older man named Leo, who'd served in the fleet during the early days of the conflict. He'd lost his ship, most of his crew, and his left arm in the Battle of the Helios Array. The prosthetic he wore now was military grade, efficient, but not subtle. Heard, you're the guy who saved the world, Leo said, as he poured my drink. I'm the guy who convinced the world we were too annoying to be worth conquering. I corrected. Same difference. He slid the glass across the bar. This one's on the house. Hero discount. I'm not a hero, Leo. Heroes are the ones who fought and died. I'm just the guy who talked. Talking is harder than fighting sometimes, Leo said. Fighting, you just react. Talking, you have to think. You have to understand the other side well enough to manipulate them. That takes a different kind of courage. I took a sip of my drink, something amber and burning. Did you ever think we'd actually survive this? When the collective first showed up, when they started taking our colonies, did you think we had a chance? Leo considered the question, polishing a glass with his good hand. Honestly, no. I thought we were done. But then I remembered something my grandfather told me. He was a Marine, fought in the Pacific. He said, "The difference between winning and losing sometimes comes down to who can take one more punch. The side that can stand up after getting knocked down one more time than the other guy. That's who wins." Rule number 1, I said quietly. What's that? Just something I told the collective, that humans don't know when to quit. Leo laughed. Damn right we don't. We're too stupid, or too stubborn. Pick your poison. I raised my glass. To being too stupid to know when we're beaten. I'll drink to that, Leo said, clinking his glass against mine. We drank in comfortable silence for a moment. Two humans who'd survived the end of the world, through different means, both wondering what came next. You know what the strangest part is? I said eventually. I think the collective respects us more now than they did before the war. How do you figure? Because we made them work for it. We didn't roll over. We didn't make it easy. And in the end, we forced them to acknowledge us as equals, even if they'd never admitted in those terms. I swirled my drink. There's something to be said for making your enemy respect you. Better to be respected than liked, Leo agreed. Although both would be nice, I added. One thing at a time, diplomat. I finished my drink and stood up. Thanks, Leo, for the drink and the conversation. Anytime, Mr. Raw. And hey, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're the one doing the talking. If it was up to guys like me, we'd probably have tried to punch our way out of this mess. Sometimes punching is the right answer, I said. But sometimes you have to know when to use your words instead. I left the bar and made my way back to my quarters. Exhausted, but strangely satisfied. The treaty wasn't perfect. There would be complications, violations, disputes that would need to be resolved. The collective wasn't suddenly going to become our best friends, and humanity wasn't suddenly going to become a major galactic power. But we'd survived. We'd maintained our freedom, and we'd proven something important. Not just to the collective, but to every species in the galaxy, watching to see what happened when you stood up to an empire. We'd proven that sometimes, against all odds, the little guy wins. Not because they're stronger, or smarter, or better equipped, but because they're willing to keep standing up, no matter how many times they get knocked down. That was rule number 1 after all. Never underestimate a species that's too stupid to know when they're beaten. Epilogue 5 years later. The sovereign collective still exists, still controls a vast swath of the galaxy. But things have changed in subtle and not so subtle ways. The Treaty of Proxima became a template. 12 other species negotiated similar agreements, gaining autonomy in exchange for cooperation. The collective, rather than spanning the galaxy through fear and force alone, now operates more like an actual federation, still authoritarian, still powerful, but tempered by the need to maintain diplomatic relationships. Wars of conquest have become rarer, not because anyone has become more enlightened, but because everyone watched what happened when the collective tried to subjugate humanity. They saw the costs, the complications, the years of insurgency and resistance. They saw that even victory could look a lot like defeat. As for me, I'm still the Earth Council's chief negotiator, still spending my days hammering out trade agreements and resolving disputes, and generally being bored out of my mind with the minutiae of interstellar diplomacy. But occasionally, when I'm sitting across from some alien representative who's trying to intimidate me with displays of force or threats of retaliation, I think back to that first meeting with Vexthor. I remember standing in that chamber, facing down an empire, armed with nothing but words, and the absolute conviction that humans were too stubborn to give up. And I smile because rule number 1 isn't just about humanity. It's about any underdog, any species or person or group that refuses to accept that the game is over. just because someone bigger says so. It's about the fundamental truth that sometimes the only thing standing between you and defeat is your refusal to acknowledge that you've lost. The sovereign collective thought they'd won. They forgot that winning isn't just about who has the bigger guns, or the better ships, or the more impressive empire. Sometimes it's about who wants it more. And nobody wants it more than someone who's too stupid or too stubborn to know when to quit. That's rule number 1, and may the galaxy never forget it.